Hello, everybody. You know who I am. I'm your favorite English teacher, and I have a very special guest for you today on the Profe Show. That's my name for it, George's. It's the Profe Show. I have actually, I better make sure because I believe George's is French. Now, a lot of people think that all Canadians speak French. It's not true. I did take some French in university, but my Spanish is much better than my French. So first, George's, make sure, am I pronouncing your name correct or should I say it differently?
No, so first of all, thanks for having me. And the way I'm French American, so I grew up in
Gotcha.
France to American mother. I spoke English at home a lot, so I really don't sound French at all. Although I can obviously speak it. I actually just say George in English because it makes life easier. I mean, that's the way it's pronounced in English. I don't like ask people to like specifically pronounce my name in the French way or whatever. So yeah.
Okay, well yeah. Well, from now on, then I'm gonna call you George. It's easier for me. Yeah,
Sure.
you could have names in different languages. So yeah, in French, Georges. In English, George, and then in Spanish, you're Jorge, right?
Correct. Yeah, yeah. I often use that as well.
Mhm. All right. Now, for people who don't know who George is, I found him on Twitter through my Gringo network, and he has, well, he's going to describe it to us, but it looks to me a company. Uh, Seems to be like a recruitment agency trying to get software developers from Latin America, helps them get uh, jobs with international companies or companies in Canada, the United States. But I think George can explain a lot better than us. So maybe explain to us what is gringojobs.com or the company that you have for people who want to know.
Yeah, sure. So Gringo Jobs is so we're mostly a recruiting agency. We focus on connecting Latin American talent, mostly tech talent, so software engineers of different types, with US companies to work remotely. So not you almost zero relocation. Everybody just works remotely from their own country, but with US tech companies. And so after COVID, things really took off, obviously, with remote work. And Yeah, that's basically what we do. And so our site is gringojobs.co. One day I hope to have the .com, but it's really
Somebody took
expensive.
it? Oh, really?
Yeah, it's like $70,000 or something. One day.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, one day.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, that's basically what we do.
Mhm. And I think you also have on your Twitter account, I saw that you also have a free course for Latinos. It's Get the Gringo Job, right?
I do. Yes, I do. Yeah. So I always would get asked the same questions from candidates. And so I just thought it'd be easier to put everything together in a free course so anybody can go take it. It's called getthegringojob.com. And tell you most things I know about, writing a resume, answering questions, how to present yourself in English. It's not really an English lesson. It's much more
No.
like getting a job once you already
Mhm.
speak some English.
Yeah. Well, I saw on the website that basically you said, if you want to get a gringo job, you're gonna have to have like a B2 level of English, and we'll talk more about that later on in the interview. But yeah, is it in Spanish or is it English?
It's a bit of a mix, actually. It's
Oh, okay, yeah,
Spanglish. I'd say I speak Spanish about half the time in the course.
okay. So, anyways, shout out to George. Yeah, George's. Oh, I'm getting mixed up with George and George's. I wonder how
I
you say
know.
that in possessive in French, but in English, George's.
Yes,
This
yes.
is
People have
better.
said that before. People have said that. It's weird. It's like a plural. It's like I have many. There are many of me.
Yeah, a plural of a plural, exactly. So,
Yeah.
anyways, if you're interested in what George does, check out his course and his website. But to start this off, I always like to get to know people a little bit, and especially, well, you know Latinos pretty well. They like to get personal. So, I wanted to ask a little bit about your personal life, if you don't mind. Like you said, your mother was American and I guess your father was French. And I was one of the first questions I wanted to ask you because I saw on your Twitter account you had the French flag and the American flag, and you kind of explained it to us. But maybe explain to us a little bit about your childhood and your parents because it seems interesting.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I was born and raised in France, in Paris.
Mhm.
Uh to like in a bilingual household. So, basically spoke English at home, French outside, and went to a bilingual school. Again, French, mostly French, I would say. It's like mostly a French public school with a little bit of English as well. And yeah, and essentially Paris is where I'm like my hometown. But went to university in the United States and basically stayed kind of in the US and Latin America after college. Although I recently moved to Spain, which is where I live now. And that's only five months ago. So this is the first time I'm living in Europe again in many years. So yeah, that's kind of my personal background. So yeah, like I would say like sort of this, bi-cultural French American type person.
Did you have affinity, one more than the other? Do you feel more French? Do you feel more American, or do you kind of just feel international?
That's a good question. It depends on the context. Like there are moments when I feel more French, moments when I feel more American. And also it depends a little bit on how, like if I'm in a situation where I've been speaking French a lot, then I kind of get more used to it. And then the English might suffer a little bit, and then vice versa. So like right now I speak English way more than I speak French. So probably my English is probably, a little bit fresher, but that's about it.
And it sounds like, when was the last time that you went back to your home country, France?
I was there over the summer. I'm going to go back in May. I mean, now that I'm in Spain, I can go. I go all the time.
Yeah.
Like it's super easy.
And is there anything, I travel a lot too, and there's usually things that you miss about home. Are there things that you miss about France when you're away from France?
Oh yeah, I mean, I would say, there's a lot of different things. To give you like random examples, I like the fact French people cook steak, I think, better than anybody else. Like they never overcook their steak. Okay. I think almost every other country I've been to has always overcooked their steak.
Yeah.
So it's very nice to go back to France and you order steak rare, and you will get it rare. Always. That's like a very random there are a lot of other things, but that's one thing.
Well, actually, that's one thing. Like when I worked in a restaurant in Canada, they always told us, and I now prefer it that way. If a guest asks you, how do you want to cook your steak? They told us to, recommend medium rare. So I think the medium rare is the normal temperature for, I guess, gringo steaks. But I remember when I was in Latin America, I know you spent time in Latin America, they usually one very well done in most countries. I think Argentina is an exception, Uruguay probably an exception, but if you go to Colombia or Mexico, they'll really cook it. So yeah, but I've never had a rare steak. So the French, they prefer their steaks rare.
Yeah, I would say in France, you could order it well done, but like the steak is, I would say, on the whole, people eat their steak pretty rare in France. So that's an example. But yeah, being in France, it's a very nice place to live. Great food. I don't know. I have a lot of my friends are there, so it's cool.
And maybe just one personal question to end this personal. Sure. I'm Canadian and I live in Alberta, and Alberta and Quebec have a very big rivalry. We don't really like each other that much. They call us the rednecks from the prairies, and for us, they're the Frenchies with their nose in the air. They think that they're better. And of course, French in Europe, they also have a reputation for being very proud people. But I also know, just from following you on Twitter, that you've been to Argentina, you know about Argentinians. And of course, lots of Latinos consider Americans some of the most stubborn, proud people in the world as well. So you kind of have know how the French are.
Person.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm wondering, so from your experience in France, in the United States, and I think you know about Argentinians, you might have spent time in Argentina. For you personally, who are the most proud people in the world? Are they French, Americans, or the Argentinians?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. It depends a little bit on what topic, I guess. I would say, Americans definitely have big pride points on certain things. Obviously, like kind of the big stuff, like, power and
human rights, gun rights.
Yeah, there you go. That, or like, just that kind of sheer, just like we're number one in so many things. I have spent some time in Argentina as well. I would say that Argentines and French are a bit more similar. They kind of have this sort of lifestyle pride where it's like we kind of know how to live the best. which I guess is something you see in Italians as well, which obviously influences Argentines, but it's just sort of like, we got the best lifestyle. Like we know how to live better than anybody else. So I think, yeah, I mean, definitely, like, I don't know, French people might be a little more snooty with things like bread, which is a very like important part of French culture, and French people have very high standards for bread. And I'm sure Argentines have other stuff, maybe steak, or I don't know,
Actually,
ice cream or whatever.
well, no,
Yeah.
ice cream is actually very good.
Yes.
I heard this from an Argentinian girl last weekend. So actually, I wanted to ask you about this because I always assumed, I think you know Media Lunas from Argentina, right?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was talking to her. I always just assumed that media lunas were croissants and that they were pretty much the same thing. But she's a true Argentinian patriot. She said, no, 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 no. Croissants are different. Croissants are fluffier. They're a little bit crunchier. They're drier. Media lunas from Argentina, they're moister. And then of course, like a good Argentinian, she said, media lunas are way better than French croissants. So maybe. So I don't know. Do you have an opinion about that? Did you try the media lunas? Do you like the media lunas
Yeah,
from
I tried them a
Argentina?
lot. Yeah. I mean, media lunas are basically just mezzalunas in Italy. You can get them in Italy too. Like they're basically just this. They're a knockoff of the Italian thing. Not to just say they're.
Yeah, you're gonna cause a controversy.
Oh, yeah, I don't want to cause too much controversy.
Yeah.
No, I think croissants are much better. I mean, like a really good croissant is lighter. It's fluffier, more butter. Media Luna has a sugar coating on top that I think just takes away from the flavor of the dough. Like a good croissant is an amazing thing. I mean, I like Media Lunas too, but I think to be perfectly honest, I think Argentine food outside of steaks is kind of like Italian food, but just not as good. I mean, I know that's like kind of I don't know if it's controversial statement, but I just find that, like, I lived in Argentina for a while, and the steak is great, the ice cream is very good, the wine is very good, and then outside of all that, you basically have kind of like sort of Italian food, like similar to like what you'd get in New Jersey in the US, right? Like it's like kind of like it's like a little bit removed, like not quite as refined as what you get in Italy. That's sort of my take in general. I ended up eating just a lot of red meat in Argentina.
Yeah, not a bad choice. You got good red meat here. Yeah, but yeah, I think it's a good comparison. I think Italian food in the United States is basically bastardized Italian food.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Same in Argentina. All right, but yeah, hopefully we didn't piss off too many Argentinians.
Hopefully
yes. All right. Well, we could talk a little bit about, I guess, your professional background, because you have this agency recruiting more or less software developers. Are you a software developer yourself, or is this something you stumbled upon?
Yeah, it's something I stumbled upon. I'm not at all a software developer. I actually started just being a recruiter in New York a few years ago, actually now many years ago, like almost 10. And I was just doing tech recruiting there. And I mostly for startups, and it was a very sort of booming time, and still is. The problem was always there were not enough candidates. We were always trying to find candidates to work for these companies. There were not enough. Everybody was competing over the same people. And so my initial kind of foray into Latin America specifically was around I actually went to Mexico because there is a special visa. Maybe you know this because you're Canadian. This is called the TN visa.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is a NAFTA related visa. So basically, if you're a Canadian or Mexican, to be like software engineer, product manager, there's like 13 different types of jobs.
I think I heard of it. It's kind of like if you have a background in a specific field and you're exceptional in it, like you get fast tracked into the American immigration process, something like that.
Yeah, you actually don't even need to be exceptional. You could just have the basic. You just need a degree in the relevant field.
Okay. Yeah.
If you're Mexican or Canadian, the process for getting a visa is like super short. It's much faster than like the normal way. So initially my idea was to go down to Mexico and find people who wanted to move to the United States and like get them to go there on these visas. And that was my initial thing. And obviously COVID just changed all of that. There was no more moving to the US, no more visas. nothing. However, the silver lining was all these US companies were like, oh, now we have to do remote. So let's do remote. And if we're going to do remote, then why just do it in the US? Like, why are we going to pay some guy or girl, 150K to like work out of their house, 10 miles from the office, whereas we just pay somebody like way less
Mm-hmm.
in Colombia or Peru or wherever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, COVID definitely changed a lot of things. And at that time, were you more of a contractor or were you working for a specific company?
So I was always like more like a contractor. I mean, I into like what do you call like
Mm-hmm.
contingency recruiting, which is basically I'm a recruiter. I have many clients, and so I'm
Mm-hmm.
working many jobs,
Yeah.
and so I'm kind of like a marketplace almost. You know what I mean? It's like I have several jobs, many different like candidates, and I find new ones, and I
Mm-hmm.
try to put them in processes in different
Mm-hmm.
companies.
Yeah, and you've been doing this for a long time. I had one student. He has an international job, kind of the ones that you described. I interviewed another guy. He's from Latin America, who basically kind of fits your profile, a software developer who now has a gringo job remotely, and he lives well in Nicaragua. So for both of them, I learned that the best place to find these gringo jobs is LinkedIn. But you've been doing this for a long time. When you were first starting out as a headhunter, as a recruiter, were you basically finding people on LinkedIn, or was it different at the very beginning?
No, honestly, LinkedIn's been with me for my whole career. LinkedIn is a very popular tool. I actually now I use LinkedIn less because
Okay.
we have a pretty big community on Twitter and
Mm-hmm.
like we have like other candidates we've talked to prior, and so we can like often reconnect with them if we have a new job. But I think LinkedIn still remains like the premier place to find talent.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, so you started this new company, Gringo Job. Well, when did you start, first of all? Did you start it basically when COVID started,
Yeah,
or yeah?
like
Mm-hmm.
2020, like basically it's been a little under 3 years, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
uh yeah, it's been like two, and actually let's say it's been about 2 years and a little bit. That's
Mm-hmm.
essentially how long Gringo Jobs has existed.
All right. Yeah. Well, and actually, when I first started teaching English, I knew, for example, that there were lots of people in the Philippines that were starting to work as virtual assistants, video editors, all these things. And it was always actually frustrating for me because I was teaching Latinos English, and most of them were thinking, oh, I got to move to Canada. I got to move to the United States. That's the only way that I'm going to find better jobs. And I was looking at these huge companies in the Philippines and all these Filipinos basically working from the Philippines for gringos and, making gringo dollars. And I always thought somebody or some company needs to do something to get Latinos to understand that you don't have to go to Canada or the United States to make money. So yeah, when I first found your company a few weeks ago, I said, "Oh, finally, there's somebody realizing that Latinos are well just as smart as Filipinos, and they can
Yeah.
also stay at home and make money." So maybe what was your main inspiration behind this? Obviously, you said COVID, but was it also, traveling and living in Latin America? You met all these Latinos and you said, well, yeah, these guys are perfect to work at these companies and I should do something about it.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess to give you my connection with Latin America, which kind of happened, I guess, in tandem with my jobs.
Yeah.
I lived I've lived in Argentina for about 6 months. And
Mm.
then back in 2009, I actually lived in Venezuela for a year for a
Oh,
job.
really? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, in Caracas. And so I had knew how to speak Spanish. I was already like pretty, I guess, like I felt like fairly connected to various, like to Latino culture in general. And so I kind of was looking for a way to kind of connect my knowledge of Spanish and that whole thing with my
Mm-hmm.
recruiting job.
Mm-hmm.
So I obviously, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of talent in Latin America. Like they're just as good as anybody else. And yeah, I mean, the whole like I think when remote work hit, there was this kind of realization that I mean, it's actually very similar to the way a lot of like the remote worker Twitter goes, where they're like, "Oh man, this life is amazing. Like if I live in Argentina and I have a
Mm-hmm.
job in the U.S., like I can live like the best life imaginable,
Hmm.
instead of going to the US and, paying crazy rent, etc. And so there's, this real is like kind of big, this value prop for the talent, which is like you can stay in your own country, you know, your family, your friends are all the same. Like if you bought a house like that, you can still live there and you can benefit from all this, like the fact that your cost of living is super low. And go to the US a little bit if you want. Like if you need to go there for like a meeting or something, like sure, just go there for a few days. And like that's the best. And kind of realizing that that's the best setup that they can have. It's much better in reality, I think, than going to the US, uh, especially in like these big urban centers like New York, where I used to live. Yeah, it's really challenging to live there. If you have a spouse and kids, even more challenging. And like I think a lot of people, unless they're really obsessed with the US and like their dream is to go to the US, I think a lot of them ended up finding much more satisfaction by staying wherever they were, just working remotely.
Yeah, maybe talk about that quickly because, yeah, again, there's still, it's kind of ingrained in the Latino culture is that they see the United States or they see Canada through rose-colored glasses. Just everything is better there. And, maybe one thing might be, well, actually, it's kind of getting worse now, but I think security, more or less, especially in Canada, maybe United States a bit less, security is better in, I guess, the gringo
Yes.
countries. But yeah, when I'm in Latin America, like you can live in parts which have a better quality of life than you can get in the United States or Canada. So I try to tell students this all the time, but maybe from your own perspective, compare and contrast. So how would you compare life in the United States or Canada with life in Latin America for maybe somebody who just assumes automatically that it's so much better in Canada and the United States?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I had to sort of do a general comparison of the two, I would say, especially, I mean, the US, there's a large variations like cost of living depending on where you are in the US. But
Mm-hmm.
I usually look at like the big urban centers because that's where a lot of the tech jobs are. So yeah, I mean, it's a massive difference in cost of living. I mean, it depends on where you are in Latin America, but you're often looking at like a 3 to 6x difference in cost of living, which is really high. Another thing is that there are certain parts of life in America that are absurdly expensive. So those parts being education, healthcare, real estate, that are like crazy expensive for effectively this, like it's the same thing, right? Like healthcare in Latin America, especially if you're going through like a private system, is really good. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
really just as good as in the US. I mean,
Yeah.
it's arguably better in many ways. And it's a fraction of the cost. So like there's a lot of things like that where I feel like in Latin America you just don't take those risks, right? Like if you're in the US, I mean there's so many horror stories of people, you know, getting in an accident or getting sick or something unpredicted, that ends up bankrupting them or putting them in like serious financial trouble, and they spend hundreds of hours on the phone with the insurance company because they don't want to cover like a doctor that's not in network and blah blah blah, all this stuff that's basically sounds like Chinese to anybody who's not in the US, as it should, because it's a complete sort of opaque Byzantine system.
Mm-hmm.
um, and you don't deal with that when you're in Latin America, right? Because the system in Latin America actually is much better. So yeah, and I do think, yeah, I mean there is like crime and whatnot, but the other thing too is that if you start making a lot of money in Latin America, you can go live in neighborhoods that are safer. Like there are safe neighborhoods in Latin America for the most part. And if you're worried about crime, you can go live in, a nice part of the city that you normally live in. So I think in that sense, I think it's quite manageable. And also like there's other random things like the weather on the whole is like, I mean, instead, except some exceptions in the US, like, but like, Canada for sure, like Latin American weather is much better,
Mm-hmm.
like it's just it's just nicer. Like you're just,
Mhm.
it's yeah, I don't know how to, to describe it.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to describe to
Yeah,
people, but yeah, especially with weather. I think I see a lot of guys from Canada and Latin America that are on Twitter, and they just absolutely hate the weather in Canada, and they much prefer living in Latin America just to get away from all the snow. And me personally, I like the snow, but I understand the other Canadians.
sure,
I
yeah,
hate
yeah,
I hate this damn weather. I want to go someplace warm.
yeah.
Uh, I'm curious about the company and recruiting. Are there main countries that you find that you recruit from? I'm guessing right now it's probably Argentina and Mexico, or is it kind of even that you get candidates from Chile, from Central America, from Colombia, from all over, or there's certain countries right now which are a hotbed of talent for software development?
Uh, yeah, I mean, so we get like I would say, yeah, we get candidates from all over. I would say um the obviously like Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, Colombia are like the big four because
Hmm.
those are just the biggest countries.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
you get more people.
Hmm.
There are lots of other smaller countries that have tons of talent. For
Hmm.
instance, Costa Rica, like
Hmm.
they have a pretty like big like university educated population. A lot of them have studied programming, so they're a lot of them have come out and good. Chile, obviously, very developed country. It's small, but Uruguay, like some other ones like that. But we've placed people from like most random places, like Guatemala. We've done some placements. Like I don't know. Honestly, there are people from like all over the place. There's not like, I mean, there are definitely some countries that have much smaller talent pools, but I
Hmm.
would say in general, like the big four are, like
Yeah.
Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, Argentina.
Yeah, the biggest countries. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, of course, you got the inside scoop on how the process works. So, for a young Latino or even a Latino who has experience, well, basically, what are you looking for in Latinos who have the right field, whether it's software development or something else? What are you looking for in candidates?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, I guess the starters is there's an English level requirement.
Yeah.
We usually go for what's called a B2 level of English, which is like
Yeah.
the ranking.
Hmm.
B2 level is, at least in my experience, is not like perfect, but
Yeah.
it is sufficient enough to operate in a sort of Anglo environment. You might need a slightly higher level if you're doing client facing work,
Yeah.
but in general, that's what we're looking for. Then
Hmm.
outside of that, it's the typical stuff that you're looking for in a candidate, right? Like the specific job experience, like is there a lot of jumpiness? Why? Like just the kind of like classic, if there are gaps in the resume, like what are those about? Those are sort of like just general stuff. But yeah, I think what makes our thing specific is English level needs to be at a
Hmm.
certain level.
Yeah, yeah, B2 level. Yeah, I think most people who are watching this, if they follow me for a while, they know what a B2 level is. It's just it's a strong intermediate level of English. You can basically understand most conversations. You can express yourself. There's going to be mistakes, but you can express yourself pretty well, and you don't really have any problems in a professional workplace. Um, Obviously, C1 would be even better, but yeah, B2.
Sure.
It really is. You could probably get that in a year if you work really hard. A B2 level with the right system, and if you're putting the time in to learn English as quickly as possible. All right, so B2 level. And now, if there's a young guy, maybe let's say 18 years old in Colombia, who wants to get into software development, what would be the right track, whether it's in university and also work experience, for them to have the right qualifications to, in 4 years or 5 years, or maybe even less than that, to eventually get one of these sought after software development jobs, remote jobs?
Yeah, so I mean, if you're basically just entering like the world of university,
Mm-hmm.
my guess would be, you mean you need to figure out like you need to learn how to do the work one way or another. So
Mm-hmm.
you need to code. Let's say you're in Columbia.
Mm-hmm.
You can go to university,
Mm-hmm.
like Columbia University. You could do something in Columbia. There was special vocational school program called Sena, which could be cool
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
That you could do that. Effectively, you just need to learn how to get to the like
Hmm.
learn the job, get some kind of credential. I mean, you don't necessarily need a credential,
Hmm.
but let's say it does make it a bit harder to start.
Hmm.
Then my suggestion would be actually don't like it's going to be hard for you to get a US job directly.
Yeah.
My advice would be to start by getting a job in one of those consulting firms that
Hmm.
has US clients. So there are tons of them in Latin America. Like, like hundreds of thousands of people work for these consulting firms.
Hmm.
Most of their clients are American. But what it does is it helps you. First of all, it's easier to get into a job like that than getting into a directly into a US job. Uh, because they have lower requirements for English usually. And they're also happier to take on juniors because they have better training programs. Because I mean, these are agencies that essentially like take you and very quickly turn you into a relatively productive person so that they can send you to clients. But so what it helps for you is it basically allows you to get in easier. Then it also gives you the opportunity to work in an English speaking environment because your clients will be in English. So you'll be doing like client calls in English, or at least listening in on client calls in English. There'll be emails coming in English, like, code reviews will be in English, like all of it, so you really learn how to work as a developer in a US professional environment. Um, and you also obviously just get years of experience under your belt. So you're just, improving there. And once you've done that for a few years, then I think you could be in a good position to actually apply for jobs direct in the US because you'll have English experience, especially in a professional environment. You'll have some kind of like credential, which doesn't matter as much once you have experience, but might still matter a bit. And you have like actual programming experience in a professional environment, like how code gets built in a company. And maybe you've worked actually with name brand US companies. Like a lot of these consulting firms end up working with like, I mean, they're not often might not be the sexiest companies in the world, but they're working with like some like random, like, I don't know, E-Trade Financial, or I don't know, like Carnival Cruise, or like some random company, like random company like that. But, building an app for Carnival Cruise is a pretty useful piece of experience. So
Hmm.
that would be like my general suggestion.
Hmm. Maybe just for somebody who is looking on Google, for example, because you said, oh, there's tons of these consulting firms. So what exactly is it, like software development consulting? Like if they're looking on Google, what should they be looking for to find these consulting firms?
Yeah, I mean, they could be called consulting firms, sometimes called outsourcing agencies, sometimes they're just
Hmm.
called agencies. I mean, there's some big ones. So the big,
Hmm.
like to give you names, one of the biggest ones in Latin America is called Globant. They're actually based originally, I think, from Argentina.
Okay.
Uh, there's a bunch of Indian ones like Tata Consultancy Services, Tech Mahindra, uh, I don't know, like there are lots.
Hmm.
If you go on LinkedIn and look at the job section and you
Yeah.
start looking at jobs, very quickly you'll see like all of them
Hmm. Yeah, for sure.
because they're all
Now,
advertising in there.
oh yeah, okay. Now, with your job, because I'm curious about the interview process, because well, actually, I know a girl in Cali. She works in like human resources, and she's a young recruiter. So she kind of does what you do, but like in a different setting. So I've talked to her about it. But I'm curious from your own perspective, what is your job? Basically, are you on LinkedIn just looking for candidates? Are you doing interviews? How does the recruitment process work in your case?
Yeah, so I'm I'm either on LinkedIn or somewhere scouring for the talent. That's
Hmm.
one part of the job.
Yeah,
Interviewing people is another part of the job, like screening them basically, like when you're
yeah.
trying to understand if they're the right fit.
Hmm.
And then there's also a part of processing them, right? Like prepping them for an interview, post interview, setting up the next one, rejecting people, like all that kind of stuff. Just pipelining. You're basically just moving people through pipelines. So
Mm-hmm.
those are the three main parts of the job. And also talking with clients, right? Like feedback from a client, about the fit. Maybe the client has a new job. They want to brief us on a new job they're working on. They want us to work on it. That's another part of the job.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm wondering, because Latin American culture, you have experience with this, is different. And when I did the interview yesterday with the one software developer, he was talking about a big culture shock. And I always tell my students this, is that when it comes to gringos, we don't care about your family. We don't care about your backstory. All we want to know is if you can do the damn job. Like, can you do the damn job? And I know with lots of Latinos, they want to talk for half an hour about their life story. And as this gentleman said from Nicaragua, nobody told him. So basically, he spent months basically losing job opportunities because he didn't know that gringos were like this. And then one day he finally realized, if a gringo asks you a question, you just answer the damn question. You don't give details about how your mom inspired you to do this, and this is how you arrived here. And I think in your course, you probably explain a lot of these aspects, but maybe quickly, what are some things that Latinos need to realize about, getting gringo jobs and about the gringo mentality when it comes to jobs, business?
Yeah. So, I guess, you don't want to be too long-winded, right? When you're talking, when you're trying to answer a question, you don't want to start with your whole life story. I would say, in general, there is the U.S. is a more culturally egalitarian place than Latin America in general. So, in Latin America, there's this very big hierarchy depending on your rank or what social standing, or if you need something from somebody else. And in the office, that is that comes out. So in the US, especially in the tech world in the US, there's a much flatter. There is hierarchy, but it's culturally much more egalitarian in the sense that you could go to a CTO of a company and say hey, I don't think what you're doing is the right thing. Here's why I think it would be better to do it in this way. And you're not going to get fired for that unless the guy's a complete asshole. Whereas in Mexico, you might, right? That's a disrespectful thing to do. So I think generally advice that I would have for people in Latin America is, direct. Don't be afraid to challenge in an interview. Obviously, you need arguments to back it up, but you don't need to be so deferential. A good interview in the US is actually more like a good conversation. So a little push and pull, maybe some objections. You want, that's what a good interview is. Where I think a good interview in Latin America is more I answered the questions correctly. Which is kind of a school mentality. And I don't think that works as well in the US, right? In the US, you want the interviewer to get out of the interview with this feeling of wow, this person's smart. They understand what I'm working on. They're not afraid to express themselves. If they think something's, a bad idea. They have a point of view. I would want to work with this person. Not oh, they answered every question perfectly. Of course, I'll give them a job.
Yeah, exactly. I read a book a few years ago, which is a book about business and how different business cultures work. And exactly like you said, in the book, they were talking about how in Latin America, if you're lower on the hierarchy, you will never, ever are going to, say anything to the boss. Whatever the boss says, even if it's wrong, even if it's a stupid decision, you just kind of accept it and you go on with life. And I think a big thing in Canada and United States is that, obviously you want to go about it in a smart way, but if you think the boss is going to make a decision which isn't going to positively affect the company, it's your responsibility as an employee to say something about it and give your point of view, which is different than in Latin America.
Exactly.
And because you've obviously done a lot of recruiting, maybe what are some of the common mistakes you might see from Latinos who are beginning this process of looking for a remote job? Is there anything on a resume, anything that they say or do during the recruitment process that you think is a common mistake that they could easily avoid if they knew about it?
Yeah, so I think first of all, in the resume phase, there is a very specific way to do a resume in the US. And so just follow that way. There's a lot of different things, like don't put your photo, don't put like
I yeah.
your age, or they put a lot of random marital status or whatever. So like
Mhm.
don't do that. Uh and like don't get cute at the resume stage. Like it's not the time to show like that you're a super creative original person. Like it needs to be very standardized.
Mhm.
So like that's a good example. I mean, that's number one. I mean, first, because the resume is the tool that gets you the first interview. Once you have your first interview, then then it doesn't really matter as much. But that I say would be the first thing. And then the other thing, especially in interviews, like the thing with interviews in is that it might be in a foreign language, but like the universe of things that you talk about is pretty limited, right?
Mhm.
Like, no one asks, like it's a fairly like it's very structured conversation,
Mhm.
which means you can really practice, like you can game it, you know what I mean? Like you can like review, like it's very probable that someone's going to ask you a behavioral question, right? Which is like, tell me a time when you dealt with this situation and how did
Yeah.
you resolve it or whatever, something like that. So you can like practice that, right? You can come up with every situation that you could think. I mean, come up with like, 5 or 6 situations. There's a special method called like the STAR method, which is like
Okay.
situation, task. I don't know,
Mhm.
I don't even remember what the other ones are, but like
Yeah.
it's a method. Just learn it, do it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like that's the other thing too. Like just it's structured. So practice and like come in with like a ready to like say specific things. Don't just kind of come in and be like, all right, well, like throw questions at me.
Mhm. Yeah. 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 Because I think it's more of a filtration process, right? My mom worked in human resources, and I remember when she was getting resumes, she worked at a construction company. Is basically all she wants to do as a, I guess, a gringo human resources manager is look at a resume, go through quick. Do they have the qualifications? Yes.
Yeah,
Okay. It gets put into this pile. No, they don't have the qualifications. All right. Throw it out.
that's
And
it.
yeah, another thing about Latin America, I remember when I was applying for some jobs in Mexico, yeah, they were asking for marital status, do I have kids, all this stuff. And
Yes, weird.
again, for gringos, you don't need to put any personal information. Everything has to do with work. Do you have the qualifications for the job? What's your work experience? Do you have references? If you do, fantastic. We're going to interview you. And it's just like that. So basically, it's a filtration process, right?
Yeah, that's all it is. The goal of the resume review stage is like the idea there is that you want to get rid of candidates because let's say you have 10 hours to do first round interviews. So you can do like 15 interviews. So you need 15 people. So
Mhm.
if you have 100 resumes, your goal is to take those 100 resumes and turn them into 15. So
Mhm.
that's an elimination
Mhm.
process. So you need to like reject people.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And in that interview stage, because obviously, let's say there's 15 candidates, and you or the company has to choose one, for example. Uh, what would be one of the deciding factors? Like just so that Latinos know, would it be personality? Would it be work experience? Would it be how well they speak in English? What would be one of the things that puts them over the top over somebody else?
Yeah, I mean, I think uh so are you talking about more like in the interview part or
Yeah,
the
the interview
resume?
part. Yeah, because obviously, so they passed the resume part. Like, so the resume, they have all the qualifications that you're looking for, and now you're interviewing them, like you or the company, whoever it is. What obviously, if all the
Oh, like
candidates
what
have
makes them
more,
stand out?
yeah, what makes them stand out? Because maybe for Latinos, they may think, oh, if I put on certain makeup or if I look really cute, maybe that's
Uh,
going to get me the job. But what would be something that would make them stand out, make them get them over the top, and give them the best chances of getting the
yeah, I mean,
job?
I think some of them, a few things, but I think obviously one of them is some level of company research, like understanding what the company does, understanding like what the challenges of the company might be and the challenges of the role. Not being afraid to ask like, you know, maybe difficult questions like, um, is this job like replacing somebody else? And if so, why did the other person leave? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
like, which can maybe be a little bit weird, but it helps them understand, like, is this an easy, like, what's it, like, what's my, like, what does success mean in this job? Like,
Hmm.
things like that, right? Like, a little bit more probing questions
Hmm.
is pretty useful.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then obviously speaking English well is helpful. Again, practicing the interview, right? Like practicing talking about yourself, like mastering that. Like, interviews usually start with a, hey, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? So that's going to be like a 30-second thing.
Hmm.
Like, get that tight, right? That needs to be a tight text. Like, you need to know that, right? I've had candidates go on for like 10 minutes about every single thing they did, and you're just like falling asleep at the end, right? You have no idea what they're talking about anymore. So
Yeah.
like, really, like, just, like that kind of, like, keeping things tight, asking probing questions, like really understanding that the interview is not just like that the person has 30 minutes to try to extract information from you and you from them, and like
Mhm.
be aware of that so that you
Mhm.
manage the time in a smart way. Like, don't just like go off about your life for
Mhm.
10 minutes. It's a waste of time in a
Mhm.
in a process where time is pretty limited.
Mhm. Yeah, and you said Titan. I think anybody watching this will probably know what that means, but in a way, it's maybe a English that you might not see in a textbook, for example. So yeah, when we're talking about tight, we're basically talking about be efficient. Be efficient with your time. Don't
Yeah.
be wasting time. Don't be like George said, don't be spending 10 minutes talking about personal details or a big story. So just be efficient with your time with the interviewer.
Yeah.
And because as an English teacher and the English institutes, they always talk about how English opens doors. So I like to ask this question because it helps me, and I think also helps Latinos understand what these opportunities are. So maybe a salary comparison. I've heard from my students that compared to the jobs they get in their country, compared to the jobs they can get, for example, as a software developer, uh, with a remote job, they can get anywhere between 5 to 10 times higher salary compared to what they get in their home country. So for somebody who doesn't quite understand what those opportunities are, what are they looking at for salary? How many hours? Is the work schedule better? Is the work schedule harder? Compared to a job that they might get in Latin America.
Yeah. I can speak maybe from the from the software engineering standpoint,
Yeah,
because it's where I have more information.
yeah.
A software engineer, let's say in a lot like in Latin America, working remotely for a US company, let's say with, I don't know, 4 years of experience, could probably stand to make, let's say, $60,000 to $70,000 per year.
Mhm. All right.
So that's in Latin America, that's depends on where, but like,
Yeah.
you're living pretty well on 70K a year
Mhm.
in Latin America.
Mhm.
What would they make in in like a Latin American company? I don't think it would be 10 times less. They're not
Mhm.
making 7K a year. They're making more than that, but they're
Yeah.
probably making like 3 times less, I would say.
Mhm.
Um, and so I would say, like, and then obviously it depends, right? Like, as you get more senior, salaries get higher. Like,
Yeah.
there are plenty of people who make six figures and up in Latin
Mhm.
America remote.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think the hours really depends on the company.
Yeah.
There's probably, it's all remote, so there's less like kind of that sort of, like sitting in the office, showing face, which is actually very popular in Latin America. That sort of like,
The meeting. I have students that always talk about the meetings. Just, I had to do like 3 meetings today, and they always
yeah,
say, I hate all those meetings. So it seems like meetings are very popular in Latin
yeah. There's
America.
a lot of like what you call like seat warming in Latin
Yeah.
America, like just getting there and just being at the desk and like pressing buttons on the computer and looking productive.
Hmm.
And obviously when you're working remote, it's much more, personal responsibility based. But also you have more flexibility. So I don't know.
Hmm.
So that would be kind of the differences. You'd have to get used as well to like I think written English is important.
Mhm.
Like a lot Slack English, which is kind of like a weird term, but I think it's becoming something
Okay.
significant. Like
Yeah.
being able to know how to communicate in chat apps in English
Mhm.
in a professional setting, because that is
Yeah.
how a lot of people chat now,
Yeah.
is helpful. So like outside of that, I think it's sort of similar.
Yeah, for sure. Uh, I'm wondering the jobs that you're recruiting for, are they part-time jobs? Are they full-time jobs? Do you have candidates who are working, three different jobs because the job just, they don't need
Oh,
somebody to work as many hours? I'm just curious about that and for the people who are interested in getting these remote jobs.
yeah. So we have, I mean, I would say it's almost always full time.
Yeah.
It's possible that that people are working more than one full-time job that I'm not aware of.
Yeah.
Uh, but
Yeah. Yeah. Behind your
yeah,
back.
behind,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Like there maybe
Yeah.
it's working like three. But yeah,
Yeah.
we mostly deal with like full-time um indefinite jobs. So
Mhm.
like not project based, which is another world that exists, right? Where you can do like, they need some type of developer for an 8 month or three
Mhm.
month gig.
Mhm.
But no, we mostly deal with like indefinite jobs.
Mhm. All right. And we're getting to the end here. Network, I've talked to some of my other students, and they talk about how networking is very important. So when somebody is first getting started out looking for these remote jobs, these gringo jobs, uh, from your own experience, where are the best places to start networking or start connecting with people like you or other recruiters or even companies or even just people in the software development field, whether it's more of a gringo focus than a Latin American focus? Because I'm guessing the communities are different in Gringolandia compared to Latin America.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you could do, I think Twitter is a good spot. I mean, we're very active there.
Mhm.
And there are a lot of, I mean, there are a lot of American tech people that are there as well.
Mhm.
They're not necessarily focused on hiring people in Latin America, but you can connect with them,
Mhm.
and they might find an interest. You could work LinkedIn as well. LinkedIn's a good place.
Mhm.
An interesting thing you can do on LinkedIn is you can go to companies and then search the people there and like search by country. So you can actually see if American companies are hiring people
Mhm.
in
Yeah.
your country.
Yeah.
Even if there's no job officially posted, you can at
Mhm.
least see that like, okay, this company hires people in, Colombia or Argentina or whatever.
Mhm.
And maybe that could be a company that you would want to like talk to. So you could like go find the hiring manager or the head recruiter who works at that company, connect with them and just be like, like, hey, I'd like you to know that I exist. Here's who I am in case something comes up.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think one thing that you said, which I think is very important, I always tell students, and something that frustrates me when I get people messaging me, I think just like a culture shock between Latinos and gringos is, yeah, just make sure you do your own research. And I think a lot of stuff that you're talking about is, if you're gonna go to LinkedIn, don't just start sending random spam messages saying that you're looking for a job. Make sure you're doing a little bit of research. Like you said, see if they have employees from your own country. Because I don't, just for me as a gringo dealing with Latin Americans, I find that's one thing. I'll get these spam messages just saying, teach me English, and they don't do anything to do some research first. And talking to other people, I know it's a common thing that Latinos do, and it can you're just going to get ignored, and nobody's going to pay you any attention. So yeah, make
Yeah.
sure you do your own research. All right. Well, I think we covered almost everything I wanted to talk about,
Amazing.
George. I'm not too sure. Is there anything else that you want to add for the people who are watching this?
No, I mean, I think, good luck. I think the general like trends for the next few years favor Latin Americans who want to work remotely. Like I think that's
Mhm.
going to happen. There's going to be more and more of it.
Yeah.
And so you might as well start now and thinking in terms of years on like, all right, I'm gonna in like 2 years, I'm gonna set everything up so that in 2 years I can get this.
Mhm.
Yeah, learn English. Like you can start doing that immediately and like it's always valuable.
Yeah.
And yeah, and also like rejection happens all the time, and ghosting is a huge part of trying to get a job. And
Mhm.
like the reality is, don't worry too much about it. It's part of the deal. And like you just need one job. You don't
Mhm.
need like five. So as long as you just get one at the end of the day, you're good.
Right. Yeah. Well, good advice. Thank you very much for your time. I'm going to leave all the contact information and also
Cool.
the websites for George down below in the description. He has the course and he also has his company's website. So yeah, if you're a software developer from Latin America, make sure you check out everything that George has. And yeah, so again, George, thank you very much for your time. I'll let you go to your meeting and hopefully we'll
Thanks.
talk soon in the future. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Kyle.
Right. Bye, George.
All right. Bye bye. Ciao.